There's no room for feelings in management.
Right.
However, we're looking for leaders, and we're talking
Yeah.
about leadership a
Yeah.
lot more of the time, I find, than managing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was his language, not the way
Right.
that he
Yeah.
expressed it. Yeah.
Now, there's a concept that's related to holding space, which is this notion of liminal space.
Mm.
And again, I don't think that's a word that's out there in the business vernacular as prevalent as maybe it could be. How would you define it, and how does it relate to holding space?
Yeah, it's something I talk about a lot because after my post went viral and people started wanting me to talk about holding space, I thought, well, I need to get better at defining what is the space we're holding. So I went looking for some definitions that felt useful to me. And I came across this concept of liminal space. And liminal comes from, I think it's Greek originally, a word that limen, which is the space in between. And it's a concept that comes out of anthropology. Anthropologists were studying cultures that were better at honoring the transitions we go through in our life. And in
Mm,
particular, like indigenous cultures where a youth will go out on a vision quest before becoming an adult. So they were honoring those spaces in between the youth and the adulthood. So liminal space is the space in between one story and the next that you're evolving into. And the metaphor that I use for it is the evolution of a caterpillar into a butterfly. It doesn't go directly from caterpillar to butterfly, but
yeah.
it dissolves and deconstructs into a gooey mush inside this cocoon. And it needs that deconstruction phase in order to reconstruct as the butterfly. And so I've used this concept to help people understand the changes that they go through, the big traumas in their life, marriage, divorce, changing a job, having a child. Everything has within it a liminal space. It has that kind of empty space of, oh, wait, nothing from that old story makes sense anymore, but I don't yet know what the new story is. I'm becoming a
Mm,
mother, or I changed my job or something like that. And so it's the understanding. And some of it I base on, I don't know if you know Theory U work, Otto Scharmer's work of letting go and then letting come. And then
yeah.
also William Bridges, who writes about transitions, who's
Yeah.
been a really helpful learning model for me too, is let's recognize that in between space. Let's not rush. I think we have a bit
Yeah.
of a cultural imperative to just get on with it. Just,
Yep.
that linear movement towards a more successful future kind of thing. And it's a bit of
Yeah.
a capitalist kind of model. But no, let's actually take a step back and honor that we feel a little lost in between, a little confused, maybe a little sad. There's maybe grief. There's a lot of stuff that has to come up in order for us to be ready for the next stage.
And so, what is liminal in our workplaces then? Because, when I think of some of the changes you've talked about, there's space, like or time, there's time maybe.
Hmm.
How do we look at liminal space in a workplace context?
I think, I mean, a lot of workplaces will have change management teams or,
Yep.
like we're always trying to manage change. And maybe if we took the management out of that title, for example, we'd
Yep.
recognize that it's transition like processing or supporting teams rather than change management. There's always change. The change is present all the time, whether it's
Yep.
you're hiring new employees and now you have to adapt to having a whole new team. Your team is going through a liminal space because it's having to reconfigure itself, or you're having budget cuts. Each of us individually has our own liminal spaces that we're going through, and that impacts the workplace. So if somebody goes away on maternity leave because they're having a baby, well, that's not just a personal story. That becomes a collective story because now, the person is away and we're filling the gap and there may be a new person there. So there's always, I mean, it's kind of in some ways, and I've been examining and evolving this concept of liminality. I really think there's different types of liminality. There's the kind of linear, something changes and then something else evolves. I think there's also seasonal liminality where we go
Yep.
into a season of where we're kind of lost. Maybe it's an organization that's not serving the purpose it once served, and it's not sure of its purpose anymore. And should it evolve into something new, or should it dissolve and no longer be an organization? So that's a kind of season of liminality. And then there's also, I think there are some of us who have a kind of calling for liminality. It's almost like we are the edge walkers who live in sort of a liminal cultural space that are set apart to become the people who are in that kind of transformation work. Like you and
Right.
I, in some ways, I feel like we've taken on a bit of positional liminality so that we can support this in the world. So I think there's different ways of examining it as an understanding and learning to hold space for that, learning to be, again, with that discomfort of it and the
Right.
ambiguity of it.
I'm going to make up a new title for myself. Liminal walker.
Yeah.
Or liminal guide, liminal
Liminal
host.
guide. Yeah, that's a good one.
So Heather, here I'm going to kind of share back to you and for all of us listening and watching, try and pull this all together. So tell me if it's kind of all coming together. Liminal space exists when we transition through change.
Yeah.
There's lots of changes going on in our workplaces. There's lots of changes going on in our lives.
Yeah.
And how we respond to these liminal spaces, these transitions, can either be with awareness, with a connection to ourself, with humility. I was going to say with reverence, but that maybe is getting a little bit too kind of spiritual.
I think that's
But
certainly part of it.
reverence. And when we approach it from that place, we are more inclined to be able to hold space and let go of outcomes. That's ideally where we want to be.
Yeah.
However, many of us are unintentionally in a highly reactive state of focusing and skipping over the liminal space and skipping to this is what the outcome needs to be. We are going there. We need to be accountable. This is what we need to do. And like very task focused. Have I kind of sort of pulled it all
Yes,
together?
very much.
Okay.
And this is part of the reason we talked about how holding space needs to become a core competency for leadership. And this is one of the reasons, because if you don't develop this as a core competency among your leadership, then you're going to have a lot of resistance. You're going to have a lot of fear that comes up, a lot of activation. You're going to be pushing through and ignoring the emotional experience of people. You're going to be stepping on people, let's face it, and causing harm. And also, you're not going to evolve into the best that you can evolve into. The outcome will be determined by how well you hold space for the liminal space before that outcome, I think.
I'm going to quote you on that, Heather. I love that. The outcome, but it's true. There isn't a company or a friend or a family member that isn't experiencing some sort of change that is significant.